Hi, Kansas City moms. We're excited to have Dr. Flynn and Dr. Ung from Children's Mercy. They are pediatric psychologists, and we are here today to talk about not a fun topic, but an important one for parents in Kansas City, about just guiding your children through grief if they lose a friend or someone important to them. So just to dive right in, can you talk about how children process grief differently than adults and how that might vary by age?
Absolutely. So great grief looks a little bit different for kids compared to adults. Their reactions really do depend on their age, their developmental stage, as well as their past experiences with loss. So, for example, if they've lost a pet in the past or they've lost grandparents in the past, all of these three different factors, again, age, developmental stage, and previous experience with loss really do shape how their reactions look. So typically for kiddos who are kind of at that chronological and developmental age, so meaning that their age is around 4 and under, their understanding of death is quite premature, meaning like they don't really have an understanding of death and the permanence of death. And so grief at this age may look a little bit different from what we would see in adults, in that kiddos 4 and under in this kind of age group um, might have some behavioral or developmental regression, meaning that they might kind of go backwards to some behaviors that they may have grown out of. So, for example, if they're like 4 or 3 and they just finished that stage of thumb sucking, they might regress back to it. You might see that pop back up. Kiddos at this young age also show grief in more irritability. They might just be more fussy. They might be also more clingy to their caregiver. You may also see problems with sleep, so problems falling asleep, staying asleep, that can also show up at this age group. And then just overall confusion, just not quite understanding what death is kind of part of that. And then the other thing too for this age group is that these kiddos tend to ask the same question over and over again, which can kind of throw caregivers kind of a little back about like, why do they keep asking that question? I already answered that a ton of times, but it's because of that confusion. They don't quite understand what death and that permanence of death means. And so they tend to ask the same question, like when their loved one is coming back. Okay. The other piece of things too is that kiddos in this age range is that they might be fine one moment, right? They might be playing, they might be really happy, and then all of a sudden you get a question about the person that they lost, right? And so sometimes it can be disorienting for caregivers or parents because all of a sudden this kiddo is playing and then you get hit with a question that just kind of feels out of nowhere. But it's because at this developmental stage, our kiddos at this group or level is really focused kind of on themselves, which is absolutely age appropriate. And so when they get reminded of and maybe a thought or reminded of their loved one, that's when they start to ask. And so it feels a little bit kind of disorienting. Moving on to kind of the next group of kids. So for children's ages 4 through 7, this group of kids, they still do not quite understand death in the same way adults do, because they might still see death as temporary and reversible. And then they also may show kind of inaccurate thoughts about the death. So they might say, hey, like, did I do this to cause this death? Okay. And it may not make a whole lot of sense to us as adults. It may not be super logical. And so they might show kind of those more magical explanations of death of like, well, I stepped on a crack and this is why my friend passed away, right? And so it may not be super logical in that sense, but that's how they're trying to make some meaning or trying to understand what that is. Similar to those younger kids we just talked about, these kids from ages 4 to 7 can also show that same regression to earlier behaviors and have sleep disruptions. They may also have nightmares about their friend or whomever they may have lost. We may also see changes in appetite as well, so eating more, eating less than typical. And then in their play itself, you might start to see themes of death and even violence if the person they loved who passed away had violence as part of how that person passed. And so you might see those themes play out in their play. Again, this is all how grief shows up, and so all kind of expected from a typical development standpoint. So not really super concerning if that does show up in their play. Okay. The other next stage, I should say, is that children in the school age and pre-adolescent age range, so ages 7 through 13, they have a more developed understanding of death due to that more advanced ability to have logical thinking that comes with this age group. Okay. So specifically, they might understand that death is final, even though they may express wanting the death itself to be reversible, the loss to be reversible. So grief in this age group, again, kind of that school age, pre-adolescent age, you might see that same behavioral and developmental regression, but you might start to see more acting out behaviors at home, at school. At school, you might see problems with attention, just kind of maybe spacing out, losing focus. And so you might also see that play out in kind of impacting their grades a little bit too. Similar with younger kids, we might also see that sleep and appetite change. So we might have problems falling asleep, staying asleep, nightmares, eating more, eating less. Okay, and then this group of kids too might start expressing some fear about being sick or having injuries to themselves, as they may not quite fully understand the mechanisms and how their loved one was lost. And so they might be a little bit more on edge and ask questions about that too, or a little bit more anxious. And then they might also ask specific questions about how their loved one passed to get more details, again, to kind of better understand what happened. So they might also to ask questions about, in addition to their own safety, about the safety of their loved ones. So it can be other caregivers, other siblings, other friends, and express concern about their health status too. Okay. And then this last group here, the more adolescent range, so 13 to 18, their grief and their understanding of death looks most like adults. So, and this is because adolescents have the capacity for more abstract thinking at this developmental age. So they understand death in a very similar way that us as adults understand death. And so their grief expressions may include having extreme sadness, denial, as well as some of these things that we talked about for younger ages too. So that behavioral developmental regression. But then for adolescents, we also see newer behaviors specific to this age range. And it could be an increase in risk-taking behaviors. So we might try things that are a little bit more risky. So it could look like alcohol use, substance use, things that they typically wouldn't do, but are trying just because they might be questioning their own mortality as well. Okay. They might also be acting out, same with kind of our younger group of kiddos, but they might also prefer to talk to peers and non-family members, which is a hard one for a lot of caregivers, but they might choose to talk to someone outside of their primary caregivers. They also might show that withdrawal from their family, and as well as sometimes endorsing suicidal thoughts as well. Okay, so that's kind of how grief has differed and does differ for each kind of age and developmental group. Again, all these different grief expressions that I talked through really do depend on the child's age, developmental level, and then their previous experiences with death, whether or not they've lost a loved one in the past or a pet or whatever it may be.
Okay. So when we think of, things that have happened in our community in the last year, I mean, it happens, I'm sure, every year, but when there's an accident or something that's sudden, how much should a parent, I've struggled with this as a parent too, of just how much should you share of the details? Because a couple of those age ranges ask a lot of details about, well, what was the child doing when this accident occurred, or what was, the driver doing, or whatever. Um, what's appropriate to share, and what should you kind of, shield them from?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And I think some of that goes back to what Dr. Ung was saying on age, right? What is appropriate for a 4-year-old versus a 14-year-old to hear? What knowledge of the world do they have of intentions and how accidents happen and things like that? There's like many other things in being a parent, there's no exact right way or perfect way to share news like this. There's no handbook or rule book on these things. We do typically recommend that children and teenagers are informed as soon as possible. And that's mostly to limit the surprise or shock of being told by somebody else.
Right.
Parents can also do this in a safe way where whatever the reaction of the child may be, they have a safe spot to let out their grief. So at home, at a safe spot in their room, with a safe person where they're uh, fully allowed to just express whatever comes out of them in that moment. In terms of sharing information, again, kind of taking a developmental stance, I think it will depend on each child and what each parent is the expert on their child and what they think they can happen. For older teenagers who might have access and are a little bit savvier with the internet and being able to find out details, it might be a good idea to share details in a developmentally appropriate way, such as they were in a car accident, um, whatever type of violence may have been involved, just because teenagers are useful and they can find that information out on their own too. It may also be able to help to use those terms in developmentally appropriate ways for elementary school age kids or younger, just depending on if they will hear it from other sources and then come back and ask mom and dad, well, what does this mean if somebody died by this way? Um, oh, I was going to say something else. Trying to follow your kid's lead also may be helpful. If they're asking questions, it's okay to answer. And I think for a lot of parents, it feels really icky or really uncomfortable to say, I don't know, or to not have the answers, or to not be able to completely reassure your child. And so that offers a moment to kind of model that for your child of like, yeah, mom or dad doesn't know either, and that does not feel good. Like, I don't like how I'm feeling right now. And I wish it were different, but modeling that acceptance that and for our older folks we typically call this like tolerating uncertainty, which can be a really hard topic to learn as a young kid, but modeling how you do that yourself, whether that's taking care of yourself, going on walks, offering comfort or spending time with loved ones, those can all be um, some helpful ways to do that. When we talk about loss and death for adults, it's really common to use phrases like, oh, they're passed away, they're no longer with us, they're gone. And especially for the younger age kids and those kids whose developmental stages are a little bit more literal or magical thinking, like Dr. Ung was saying earlier, we do really recommend using more concrete language, as using terms of phrase like passed away or gone can cause anxiety and fear and maybe confusion of like, well, are they coming back? Where did they go? Who are they with? Um, so using direct language would probably be best bets in terms of sharing information. Um, yeah, sharing information along those lines.
And then what about attending a funeral, especially if it's a friend? Those can be
Mhm.
hard, I mean, for adults to attend. Um, how do you make that choice if it's a good thing for your child to go?
Yeah, I think this falls kind of in the same category of it's really going to depend on the child and what they want as well. And so generally speaking, we want to take the child's lead on it. Um, and we would never want to force a child to go if they really don't want to go. And with funerals, and will there be funerals, wakes, memorial services, they play an important role in the grieving process, including for kids the same way it does for adults, as they provide an opportunity to say goodbye. Right. When it comes to whether a child should attend, like I said, there's really no right or wrong decision. Um, but if they have an interest in going, then that choice should be supported. So if a child does want to go, to their friend's funeral or a loved one's funeral. For younger kids, it could be helpful to have a trusted adult or babysitter or whomever it may be attend with them, so that if the child wants to leave because they are feeling overwhelmed or they are feeling scared or really upset and they just want to go, then it could be easy for them to step out and leave. The other piece of things is preparation. So if a kiddo is expressing interest in going, then it would be really helpful for them to prepare, just so that they know what to expect and reduce any anxiety that may come up. And so it can feel more manageable for them. So for children or any really kiddo or teen, if they, especially if this is their first funeral or wake or memorial service, having an age appropriate explanation of what to expect. So for example, kind of just sitting really explaining of people wear this certain color to symbolize this or to show this, right? So you might expect a lot of people, for example, to be wearing black, and this is why, right? Or people might be really upset and showing a lot of emotion, so they might be sad or crying, right? And just preparing them in advance of that's what they may see. Parents or caregivers can also explain in advance like how the room will look if we happen to know that. We can also just provide a general explanation or kind of general details of how a room would look in that situation. For example, like where we would stand or what we might expect to see and hear, right? Is someone going to give a talk or a speech or a eulogy or whatever it may be? And this is what that is and why, right? It's really also important to explain in advance if there will be a casket and whether the body will be present, along with any other aspects of the service that may feel unfamiliar. And also if we happen to know if the casket will be open or closed. Okay. And that might be, we may not know in advance, and that's okay. But and we want to prepare them in the off chance that it may be open. So if anybody, really child or adolescent, they should be told in advance if the casket is to remain open and prepared for that. And they might maybe given the opportunity to look at or touch the deceased and loved one the last time if they want. A lot of times kiddos may say no, and that's okay. Some kiddos will say yes and take that opportunity to say goodbye for the last time. But really preparing them in advance of what that may look like to help reduce any anxiety and to make that experience overall more manageable.
Yeah.
Can I add something onto that and just in terms of what to expect, not necessarily in terms of preparing them, but also for parents to prepare themselves of what to expect. Your child might show a lot of strong emotions, or they might not understand the significance or the level of seriousness that sometimes it comes along with funerals or different celebrations of life. I've been at many funerals where I've got a lot of 7-year-olds running around playing tag, and adults will be like, what are they doing? This is a funeral. It kind of goes back to what Dr. Ung was saying earlier, that developmental stage of understanding the permanence of death and what does death mean. It's maybe fleeting for this age of like, oh yeah, I understand grandpa's died. Can I go play tag now? I just want to reassure parents that that's a really normal response. And just because perhaps your child is expressing joy or having fun at one of these celebrations doesn't necessarily mean that they, don't miss the loved one, that they aren't sad about it. That is pretty developmentally typical for that age to kind of be going up and down through their emotions pretty more rapidly than adults do.
Yeah. So after the funeral is gone and, things have the dust has settled and life is returning to like a new normal. What are things that parents should watch for if maybe their child isn't grieving in a normal trajectory or concerns about their reactions?
Yeah, absolutely. Just like with adults, grief isn't a linear process, which really stinks because if it were, it would be much more predictable. But all of the metaphors, it comes in waves, it goes up and down. But it really is similar for children as for adults. if we're seeing some of these symptoms of grief that Dr. Ung mentioned earlier, like disruptions in sleep, nightmares, being chronically cranky, like all the time, changes in appetite, anything that you may have noticed within the first, few weeks after losing someone or first few days after losing someone, if those are lasting longer than 6 months, that might be a little bit of a clue as to, okay, this is more persistent
Mhm.
than we would typically expect. Again, grief is not linear. There may be times where I'm feeling better, but oh, it's the anniversary and now I'm feeling really icky again.
Right.
So we kind of look out for timeline of those experiences, but we're also looking at how much of an impact does it have on their daily life, right? Are they able to go to school? Are they able to spend time with friends or with family? And not just do the things that they have to do, especially with teenagers. No teenagers want to do the things that they have to do, right? But also the things that they like to do. Are they playing video games or hanging out with friends or going to sports or clubs? Or does that feel too hard right now? So we might think of, how are they engaging with friends or withdrawing? Are they engaging in school like they used to, or are they refusing to go to school? If things for younger kids, things like thumb sucking, bedwetting, anxiety with separation from caregivers, if any of those are lasting 6 months. Um, and then developmentally, just like Dr. Ung said, with the risk-taking behaviors for adolescents, does that impulsivity or that risk-taking behavior continue? Are they continuing to show signs of depression, possibly thoughts of hurting themselves, substance misuse, for longer periods of time? Those would all be indications that perhaps this grief is more chronic or long term, and they might benefit from talking to someone, getting some counseling or therapy to process that in a more structured way.
And I will add too is that it's not a hard and fast rule to 6 months.
Mhm.
And what we really look out for is like, okay, this has been, maybe it's been a couple weeks, maybe it's been about a month, but it's really impacting their functioning in all these different areas that Dr. Flynn mentioned. And that might be time we bring them in for therapy, right? It's not a hard and fast rule about that 6 months. And we really are looking at like, how is this impacting their day to day?
Mhm.
And how long is this persisting for?
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, so final question is, parents are, this is a daunting task to guide, your child through this, but often when a child loses a friend, it's the whole family that's impacted and the parents, are grieving in a, different ways. So how can parents take care of themselves while they're, trying to grieve with their child and parent their child? What can parents do?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a tricky one, right? But research does really show that a child or teen's adjustment after losing someone is really influenced by parents' own mental health and coping abilities. It plays a very strong role in how these kiddos adjust afterwards. And so parents themselves are really encouraged to find good sources of support, such as people, friends, other family members, mental health professionals, and as well as activities in their life that provide comfort and being proactive and building that into your day, even if it's like a 5 minute walk and that provides comfort. Or can we tag in grandma to watch the kids while I go to therapy, or I go see a movie and to kind of relax, or I go talk to a friend at a coffee shop, right? Really leaning on supports and your support system, as well as the activities that help you feel better, right? In those hard times. It is okay to need help or take time to take a break. It's really being mindful that we're being proactive about it rather than waiting until we are just too overwhelmed with all the responsibilities on our plate, right? Um, the other pieces of things is that parents or caregivers want to protect their child from their own reactions, right? Totally makes sense. And you don't need to hide your grief necessarily from your child. normalizing and showing your grief, knowing that it's okay to talk about the loved one who passed away, helps children and teens feel like it's okay to remember that person. It's okay to miss that person, rather it being something that's a source of anxiety or nervousness or feeling like we can't talk about it because it'll make mom sad, right? But if parents or caregivers show and express like, yeah, I am sad. I really do miss that person, right?
Mhm.
And I think I need to talk to someone about it. I need to talk to maybe grandma about it. I need to talk to my friend about it, right? We're modeling for our kids then how to take care of themselves in situations like these. And again, it kind of goes, it's hard. It's a hard balance, right? It's hard to find the time for yourself to do that. But it's also, we don't want to wait till your plate is so full while you're also trying to manage your own grief. And the other piece too is that it's really hard to maintain the same house rules, the same parenting behaviors, the same disciplines when you're also going through that grief. However, we know too that our kiddos need that structure. They need to have those rules to be consistent, because otherwise, if that kind of ebbs and flows, and we're not too sure, that unpredictability makes it hard for our kiddos to adjust. And so, really, this is coming from a place of how do we help parents to continue to parent and be parents, and really, that is to take care of themselves, lean on your support systems, and reach out for help if you need it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, ladies. I really appreciate it. And, hopefully we won't have to go through these things, but I'm glad that we have the resources here to help support kids and parents.
Absolutely.